Have you ever wondered what it feels like to hold a man's life in your hands? To know that the next breath you take, the next squeeze of your finger, will decide whether you live or someone else dies. Can you imagine being 19 years old, soaked to the bone, covered in the blood of men you ate breakfast with that morning, and being forced to make that choice in a fraction of a second? I'm 89 years old now, and I still wake up some nights with my finger twitching, still feeling that cold trigger against my skin, still hearing the sound that changed me forever. They call us heroes. They thank us for our service. They wave flags on Veterans Day. But do they really understand what we left on those beaches? Do they know what it costs a boy to become a killer, even when that killing is called duty? My name is Frank Morrison, and I fired my first shot at another human being on June 6, 1944, on a beach in Normandy, France. I was a private in the 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, and that morning I learned that war isn't anything like what they show you in the movies or what they tell you in training. War is chaos wrapped in terror, drowned in blood, and served with a side of prayers that go unanswered. The night before D-Day, we were packed into the USS Samuel Chase like sardines in a can. The ship rocked and swayed in the English Channel, and the smell of vomit mixed with diesel fuel and unwashed bodies created a stench I can still recall if I close my eyes. We'd been given a hot meal, which was supposed to be a comfort, but most of the boys couldn't keep it down. I sat on my bunk, checking my M1 Garand for the 100th time, making sure the action was smooth, that the clip would seat properly, that everything was in working order. My hands shook as I worked, and I tried to hide it from the other guys, but I could see their hands shaking too. Sergeant Miller walked through our section, his face grim and weathered. He was maybe 30 years old, but he looked 50 that night. He'd fought in North Africa and Sicily, and he had this way of looking at you that made you feel like he could see right through your skull into your thoughts. He stopped at my bunk and put a hand on my shoulder. His voice was rough, like gravel being crushed under boots. "Morrison, you scared?" I wanted to lie, wanted to puff out my chest and tell him I was ready to kill every German between me and Berlin. But something about his eyes made me tell the truth. "Yes, Sergeant, I'm terrified." He nodded slowly, and I saw something that looked almost like relief flash across his face. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Fear keeps you alive. It's the boys who aren't scared that worry me. They're the ones who do something stupid and get themselves killed in the first 5 minutes." He squeezed my shoulder and moved on, but those words stuck with me. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We lay in our bunks, listening to the ship's engines and the sound of the sea, knowing that the next day would separate the living from the dead, and we had no way of knowing which side of that line we'd fall on. I thought about my mother back in Pennsylvania, about how she'd cried when I left for basic training. I thought about Jenny Williams, the girl from my high school who'd kissed me at the train station and promised to wait for me. I thought about my little brother Tommy, who was only 12, and had looked at me like I was the biggest hero in the world when I came home in my uniform. I wondered if I'd ever see any of them again. They woke us at 2 a.m, though nobody was really sleeping. We ate a breakfast of coffee, bacon, and eggs that tasted like sawdust in my mouth. The chaplain said a prayer, and I found myself mouthing the words along with him, even though I hadn't been to church since I left home. When you're about to invade a continent held by an army that's been preparing for you for 4 years, you suddenly remember how to pray. We gathered our gear, which felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My pack contained ammunition, rations, water, grenades, a gas mask, extra socks, and a dozen other things the army decided I couldn't live without. The M1 Garand rifle in my hands weighed about 10 pounds, but it felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. At 3:30 in the morning, we climbed down the cargo nets into the Higgins boats. The sea was rough, much rougher than they'd told us it would be, and the boats pitched and rolled in the darkness. Men fell from the nets, crashing into the boats or splashing into the water. I heard screaming, heard bones break, heard officers cursing and trying to maintain order in the chaos. I gripped the rope net so hard my hands went numb, and I forced myself to climb down one rung at a time, not looking down, not thinking about falling, just moving. When I finally dropped into the boat, I collapsed onto the metal bench, my legs shaking so badly I couldn't stand. Our boat held about 36 men, packed shoulder to shoulder, facing each other across the narrow space. The coxswain at the rear revved the engine, and we pulled away from the Samuel Chase, heading towards the coast of France in complete darkness. The boat rose and fell with the waves, and the spray soaked us within minutes. Men vomited over the sides, their faces green in the dim light. I focused on breathing, on keeping my rifle dry, on not thinking about what was waiting for us on that beach. The boat next to us took a wave wrong and capsized, and I watched men in full gear sink into the black water, screaming for help that never came. The coxswain didn't stop. We couldn't stop. We just kept moving toward the beach. The sky began to lighten as we approached the coast, and that's when the naval bombardment started. The big ships behind us opened up with their guns, and the sound was like the end of the world. Shells screamed overhead, and we could see explosions on the shore, orange and red flowers blooming in the grey dawn. The noise was so loud, I couldn't hear the man next to me shouting in my ear. For a moment, watching those shells tear into the German positions, I felt a surge of hope. How could anything survive that bombardment? How could there be anyone left to shoot at us? I would learn the answer to those questions very soon. As we got closer to shore, the naval fire lifted, and for a moment there was an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of the boat engines and the waves. Then the German artillery opened up, and that silence shattered like glass. Shells began exploding in the water around us, sending up huge geysers of spray. A boat to our left took a direct hit and simply disappeared in a flash of fire and smoke. I saw pieces of the boat and pieces of men flying through the air, and I realized I was screaming, though I couldn't hear my own voice over the explosions. The ramp in front of our boat was about chest high, and behind it I could see the back of Lieutenant Hayes's head. He was standing at the front, holding his pistol, preparing to be the first man off the boat. I was in the third row, which meant I'd be one of the first dozen men to hit the beach. The coxswain was shouting something, and then I felt the boat lurch as it hit the sandbar, still about 50 yards from the actual beach. Lieutenant Hayes turned to look back at us, and I'll never forget his face. He was 23 years old, and he looked like a terrified boy. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to give us some last words of encouragement, and then the ramp dropped. The Germans had machine guns trained on that spot, on that exact spot where the ramps dropped, and they opened fire immediately. Lieutenant Hayes was hit before he could take a single step. The bullets caught him in the chest and throat, and he fell backward into the boat, his blood splashing across my face and uniform. The men in the first row tried to get off the boat, but the machine gun fire cut them down like wheat before a scythe. Bodies fell into the water, turned the surf red, piled up on the ramp. I was frozen, absolutely frozen, watching men I knew being killed right in front of me. Sergeant Miller grabbed me by the back of my uniform and shoved me towards the side of the boat. "Over the side! Go over the side!" He was screaming in my ear, and I moved without thinking. I climbed over the side of the boat and dropped into the water. It was deeper than I expected, and I went completely under, weighed down by my gear. For a moment I panicked, thrashing in the water, certain I was going to drown before I even reached the beach. Then my feet found the bottom, and I pushed up, breaking the surface, gasping for air. The water was up to my chest, and I had to hold my rifle over my head to keep it dry. Men were in the water all around me, some swimming, some wading, some floating face down, already dead. The machine gun fire was constant, a sound like someone ripping canvas, and I could see the water churning where the bullets hit. I started moving toward the beach, forcing my legs to work, to push through the water. The man next to me, a kid from Ohio named Kowalski, suddenly jerked and fell forward into the water. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I just kept moving, focused on reaching the beach, on getting out of the water where I was completely exposed. An artillery shell exploded in the surf behind me, and the concussion lifted me off my feet and threw me forward. I landed face first in the shallows, my mouth and nose filling with water and sand. I pushed myself up, coughing and gagging, and staggered forward onto the beach. The beach itself was hell on earth. Bodies lay everywhere, some moving, some still, some in pieces. The sand was red with blood, and the air was filled with smoke and the smell of cordite and burning flesh. Men huddled behind the few obstacles that provided any cover. Steel hedgehogs, wooden posts, the bodies of the dead. The shingle embankment at the far end of the beach looked impossibly far away, at least 200 yards across open sand, and the Germans had every inch of it covered with machine gun and rifle fire. I threw myself down behind a steel obstacle, pressing my body as flat as possible against the sand, and for the first time since the ramp dropped, I had a moment to think. My rifle was caked with sand and water. I ejected the clip and checked the action, my hands moving through the motions I'd practiced thousands of times in training. Sand grated in the mechanism, but it still worked. I loaded a fresh clip, 8 rounds of 30-06 ammunition, and charged the action. The metallic sound of the bolt closing was oddly comforting, something familiar in the chaos. I had a weapon. I had ammunition. I was still alive. Those 3 facts were the only things that mattered. Sergeant Miller appeared next to me, seemingly out of nowhere. His face was covered in sand and someone else's blood, and his eyes had a wild, almost feral look. "Morrison, we've got to move. We stay here. We die here." He pointed toward the embankment. "We make it to the shingle. We have a chance. You ready?" I wanted to tell him no, that I wasn't ready, that I wanted to stay right where I was and wait for someone else to win this war. But I nodded. "Good. On my signal, we run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run." He turned to the other men huddled behind nearby obstacles and gave the same orders. Then he blew his whistle, and we ran. I got to my feet and sprinted across the beach, my legs pumping, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Men fell around me, shot down by the relentless machine gun fire. An artillery shell exploded to my right, and I felt the heat of it on my face, felt shrapnel whistle past my ear. I kept running. A soldier in front of me stepped on a mine, and the explosion threw me to the ground. I rolled, came up running, my ears ringing so badly I couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched whine. 50 yards to the embankment, 40 yards, 30. A bullet tugged at my sleeve. 20 yards. Another bullet hit the sand by my foot. 10 yards. I dove the last few feet and crashed into the shingle embankment, rolling onto my back, gasping for air, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I'd made it. I was alive. I couldn't believe I was alive. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky, watching tracers arc overhead. Then Sergeant Miller was pulling me up, positioning me against the embankment. "Stay low! The Germans have this position zeroed in." Even as he spoke, mortar rounds began falling on our position, exploding in the shingle and sand, sending up deadly sprays of stones and metal fragments. Men screamed as they were hit. I pressed myself against the embankment and prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. That's when I saw him, the German soldier. He was in a fighting position about 75 yards away, partially concealed by beach grass and a concrete pillbox. He had a Mauser rifle, and he was working the bolt, firing methodically into our position. I watched him chamber around, aim, fire, and work the bolt again. He was wearing a field grey uniform and a steel helmet, and even at that distance I could see he was young, maybe my age. He fired again, and a soldier 3 positions down from me jerked and fell, a red stain spreading across his chest. Sergeant Miller saw where I was looking and grabbed my shoulder. "Morrison, you see that German?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Take him out! Take him out now!" I stared at him, my mind unable to process what he was saying. I said, "Take him out, Private. That's an order." He shoved me up against the embankment, positioning my rifle, helping me acquire the target. "Just like in training. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Do it now." I brought my rifle up, settling the stock against my shoulder, my cheek pressed against the wood. I could see the German soldier through my sights. He was reloading his rifle, his movements efficient and practiced. I could see his face now, see the concentration in his expression. He looked tired. He looked scared. He looked exactly like I felt. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't keep the sights steady. I was supposed to shoot this man, this person I didn't know, who'd never done anything to me personally. I was supposed to kill him. The training had prepared me for shooting targets, paper silhouettes on a range, but this was different. This was a human being, with parents and maybe a girl waiting for him, and dreams of what he'd do after the war. How could I kill him? "Morrison!" Sergeant Miller's voice was harsh in my ear. "He just killed Thompson. He's going to keep killing our boys until you stop him. Take the shot." The German had finished reloading and was bringing his rifle back up, aiming into our position. He was going to shoot again. He was going to kill someone else, maybe one of my friends, maybe Sergeant Miller, maybe me. I thought about Lieutenant Hayes, shot down before he could even leave the boat. I thought about Kowalski, killed in the water. I thought about all the men I'd seen die that morning, and I realized something. This German soldier would keep killing Americans until someone stopped him. That someone had to be me. I steadied my breathing, just like they'd taught us, in through the nose, out through the mouth. I focused on the front sight post, letting the German's form blur slightly behind it. I placed the sight on the center of his chest, adjusting for the slight breeze and the distance. My finger curled around the trigger, taking up the slack. For just a moment, time seemed to stop. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the grain of the wood against my cheek, could smell the gun oil and the salt spray. The German soldier was looking right in my direction, though I don't think he could see me. Our eyes met across 75 yards of sand and smoke, and I wondered if he could tell what was about to happen. I wondered if he was scared. I wondered if he had a little brother at home who looked up to him. Then I squeezed the trigger. The M1 Garand kicked against my shoulder, and the sound of the shot was swallowed by the general noise of the battle. Through the sights, I saw the German soldier jerk backward. His rifle fell from his hands. He clutched at his chest, stumbled, and fell out of sight into his fighting position. I'd hit him. I'd killed him. My first shot in combat, and I'd taken a man's life. I lowered my rifle and stared at the spot where he'd fallen. I waited for something to happen, for some dramatic change to occur inside me, but I just felt numb, empty. Sergeant Miller slapped me on the back. "Good shot, Morrison! Good shot!" He sounded almost proud, but all I could think about was the look on that German soldier's face in the instant before I fired. Would I see that face in my dreams? Would I see it every time I closed my eyes? There was no time to dwell on it. The battle was still raging, and Germans were still shooting at us. Sergeant Miller organized us into fire teams and started directing fire at the German positions. I worked my rifle, firing at muzzle flashes and movement, reloading when the clip ejected with that distinctive ping, firing again. I stopped thinking about who I was shooting at. They became targets, threats to be eliminated, not people with lives and families. It was the only way to function, the only way to survive. I fired until my shoulder ached from the recoil, until my ears were ringing even worse than before, until my fingers were black with gunpowder and my throat was raw from the smoke. Engineers came up with Bangalore torpedoes and blew gaps in the barbed wire. We pushed forward, fighting from crater to crater, from obstacle to obstacle. The Germans fell back to their secondary positions, and we took the beach, foot by bloody foot. By noon, we'd secured a tenuous foothold, and reinforcements were landing behind us. The bodies still lay where they'd fallen, and medics moved among them, trying to save those who could be saved. I sat in a shell crater, my rifle across my knees, and watched the continued landings, the endless stream of men and equipment pouring onto the beach. A medic stopped by my crater and looked me over. "You hit?" I shook my head. "Just checking. You're covered in blood." I looked down at myself and realized he was right. I was covered in blood, but I didn't think any of it was mine. It belonged to Lieutenant Hayes, to the men in my boat, to all the soldiers who died around me. The medic offered me his canteen, and I drank deeply, the water tasting of metal and chemicals. He moved on, and I sat there, alone with my thoughts. I thought about the German soldier I'd killed. I thought about how easy it had been once I'd made the decision. Point, aim, squeeze, a simple mechanical action that ended a life. I'd crossed a line that morning, a line that separated me from the boy I'd been. I'd killed a man, and I'd survived, and I'd have to live with both of those facts for the rest of my life. They didn't prepare you for that in training. They taught you how to shoot, how to move, how to follow orders. But they didn't teach you how to live with being a killer. They didn't teach you how to reconcile the necessity of what you'd done with the weight of it. They didn't teach you how to sleep after seeing the faces of the men you'd killed. Sergeant Miller appeared at the edge of my crater. He'd acquired a German MP-40 submachine gun from somewhere, and he had it slung across his chest. "Morrison, grab your gear. We're moving inland. Jerry's not going to give us a chance to catch our breath." I nodded and climbed out of the crater, shouldering my rifle. My legs felt like rubber, and I stumbled as I walked, but I kept moving. All around me, other soldiers were gathering, forming up into units preparing to push inland. We'd taken the beach, but the beach was just the beginning. We had an entire continent to liberate. As we moved off the beach and into the French countryside, I took one last look back at that strip of sand. It was covered with the wreckage of battle, destroyed landing craft, abandoned equipment, and bodies wrapped in blankets waiting for burial. That beach had been hell, but we'd survived it, some of us anyway. I thought about all the men who hadn't made it off the boats, who'd drowned in the surf, who'd fallen on the sand. I thought about Lieutenant Hayes and Kowalski, and all the others whose names I couldn't remember. They'd paid the price for our victory, and I was alive because of luck and Sergeant Miller's experience and a German soldier who died before he could kill me. I was alive, but I wasn't the same person who'd climbed down into that Higgins boat. That boy was gone, left behind on that beach with all the other casualties of war. I spent the next 11 months fighting across France, through Belgium, into Germany itself. I fired my rifle hundreds of times, killed other men, saw friends die, saw cities reduced to rubble. But I never forgot that first shot on Omaha Beach. I never forgot the German soldier's face, the way he'd looked at me in that final moment. I carry that memory with me still, 79 years later. It's part of who I am, part of the price we paid to defeat tyranny and preserve freedom. People ask me sometimes if I'm proud of what I did in the war. It's a complicated question. I'm proud that we won, proud that we stopped Hitler, proud that I did my duty alongside the finest men I've ever known. But I'm not proud of the killing. I'm not proud that circumstances forced me to become a killer at age 19. I'm not proud that I have nightmares about faces I saw through my rifle sights. I did what needed to be done, what the times demanded, but there's no pride in taking another person's life, even when that life belongs to your enemy. There's only the weight of it, the knowledge that you ended someone's story so that yours could continue. That's a burden you carry forever. It doesn't get lighter with time. You just get used to carrying it. I'm one of the last ones left now. Most of the boys who hit the beach with me that morning are gone, laid to rest with full military honors, their service remembered and honored. Soon I'll join them, and the last living memory of that day will fade with me. That's why I tell this story, why I agreed to share these memories, even though they're painful to recall. The world needs to remember what happened on June 6th, 1944. They need to remember the price that was paid for freedom, the sacrifice made by young men who should have been starting their lives, not ending others. They need to remember that war isn't glorious or romantic, no matter what the movies show. War is terrifying and brutal, and it changes you in ways that never heal. My first shot in World War II was the moment I lost my innocence. The moment I became something other than what I'd been. It was necessary, and I'd do it again if I had to, but I'll carry the weight of it until the day I die. That's what I want people to understand. That's what I want to pass on to future generations. Freedom isn't free. Democracy isn't guaranteed. The peace we enjoy was purchased with the blood of young men on beaches and in fields across Europe and the Pacific. Every veteran has their own story of their first shot, their first moment of combat, their first confrontation with mortality. These stories matter. These memories matter. They're a testament to human courage and human sacrifice, but also to human cost. Remember us. Remember what we did and why we did it. Remember that we were just kids, most of us, scared and far from home, doing an impossible job because nobody else could. Remember that we left pieces of ourselves on those beaches, in those forests, in those cities we fought to liberate. Remember, because once we're all gone, all that will be left are the history books. And the history books can never capture what it really felt like, what it really cost. Remember, so that maybe, just maybe, future generations won't have to pay the same price we did. If this story moved you, if it helped you understand what our greatest generation endured, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep these memories alive together for as long as we can. These stories deserve to be told, and these heroes deserve to be remembered. Thank you for listening to an old soldier's memories. Thank you for caring enough to remember.